The morning tastes of dust and diesel. 5 Sherman tanks of the American 2nd Armored Division idle in a shallow depression 2 miles southeast of the ruined town, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. The bocage country stretches in every direction, a maze of ancient hedgerows, sunken lanes, and small fields enclosed by earthen banks thick with roots and bramble. Visibility is measured in yards, not miles. The commander of the lead Sherman, Lieutenant James Bates of Philadelphia, scans the tree line through his periscope. His crew can hear him breathing through the intercom, steady and controlled, the sound of a man forcing calm over fear. They have been in Normandy for 7 days. They have seen what happens when a Sherman meets a tiger. The burnt-out hulks littering the roads tell that story clearly enough. Somewhere ahead, beyond the hedgerows, German armor waits. Intelligence reports a single Tiger tank, maybe 2, dug into defensive positions along the Caen road. 5 Shermans against 1 Tiger. The mathematics should favor the Americans. But mathematics do not account for the Tiger's 88mm gun, which can penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor at 2,000 yards. Mathematics do not account for the fact that the Sherman's 75mm gun can barely scratch a Tiger's front plate even at point-blank range. The Americans know this. They have been briefed. They go forward anyway, because the orders say go forward, because the infantry behind them needs the road cleared, because this is what they came to do. The Tiger tank was not merely a weapon. It was a statement of German engineering philosophy, a machine built to dominate through sheer superiority. Introduced in late 1942 on the Eastern Front, the Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger Ausf E weighed 56 tons, mounted an adapted anti-aircraft gun as its main armament, and carried armor up to 100 millimeters thick on the front glacis. It was nearly invulnerable to most Allied tank guns at combat ranges. A Tiger crew that knew their business could engage and destroy enemy armor from distances where return fire was ineffective. The psychological impact was immense. Soviet tankers called it the Beast. British crews called it Death on Tracks. American tankers, with their characteristic dark humor, called it the reason we wear brown pants. By June 1944, approximately 500 Tigers were operational on all fronts. They represented less than 2% of Germany's total tank strength, but they accounted for a vastly disproportionate share of Allied tank losses. The Tiger was slow, mechanically unreliable, consumed fuel at a catastrophic rate and required constant maintenance. But in combat, handled by a skilled crew, it was a killer. The Sherman tank, by contrast, was an exercise in mass production and pragmatic design. The M4 Sherman weighed 33 tons, mounted a 75mm gun adequate against most. German medium tanks, but inadequate against heavy armor, and carried frontal armor barely 50 millimeters thick. It was reliable, easy to maintain, and produced in staggering numbers. Nearly 50,000 would be built before war's end. American tank doctrine emphasized mobility and combined arms coordination. The Sherman was never intended to fight enemy heavy tanks alone. It was designed to support infantry, exploit breakthroughs, and overwhelm through numbers. But in the hedgerows of Normandy, doctrine met reality, and reality was cruel. The bocage negated mobility. The narrow lanes and high hedgerows forced tanks to advance in column, exposing their thinner side armor. German anti-tank guns and dug-in panzers turned every crossroads into an ambush site. American tank crews learned quickly that their Shermans were outgunned and under-armored. They learned that a Tiger could kill them from ranges where they could not effectively return fire. They learned that courage and numbers were not always enough. Lieutenant Bates and his 4 companion tanks, commanded by Sergeants Miller, O'Donnell, Garcia, and a young second lieutenant named Hewitt, had trained together in England for 2 months before the invasion. They had practiced maneuvers, coordinated fire plans, learned to communicate through hand signals and radio in the chaos of combat. They had been told repeatedly that they would not face tigers in isolation. They would have infantry support, air support, artillery support. But this morning, 7 miles behind the front lines, there is no artillery available. The fighter bombers are grounded by low clouds. The infantry is pinned down in a farmhouse half a mile back. The 5 Shermans are alone, and the Tiger is somewhere ahead, and there is no choice but to go forward. The German crew manning the Tiger tank in the woods north of Villers-Bocage expected this to be routine. They had been in France for 3 weeks, pulled from the Eastern Front for rest and refit. Oberfeldwebel Kurt Meyer, the tank commander, was 26 years old and had fought at Kursk, where his Tiger had destroyed 11 Soviet T-34s in a single afternoon. His gunner, his loader, his driver, his radio operator, all veterans, all confident, all believers in the Tiger's superiority. They had selected their position carefully, hull down behind a low rise, the gun covering a straight stretch of lane flanked by hedgerows. Perfect ambush terrain. The plan was simple: wait for American armor to appear. Destroy it at range. Withdraw before artillery or aircraft could respond. They had executed this plan a dozen times on the Eastern Front. They expected it to work again. What they did not expect was that the Americans had learned. The first encounter happens at Mo 9:34 hours. Bates's Sherman rounds a curve in the lane, and there, 600 yards ahead, partially concealed by a hedgerow, is the Tiger. The German gunner fires first. The 88 millimeter. Shell crosses the distance in less than a second, strikes the Sherman's frontal armor just below the turret ring, and penetrates. The interior of the tank becomes an inferno. Bates has 3 seconds to scream the bailout order before the ammunition cooks off. His driver and bow gunner are killed instantly. Bates, his gunner, and his loader escape through the turret hatches, their uniforms smoking. They throw themselves into the ditch beside the lane as the Sherman explodes behind them, sending a pillar of black smoke into the morning sky. The Tiger does not advance. It remains hull down, waiting for the next target. The second Sherman, commanded by Sergeant Miller, has already reversed behind the cover of a stone farmhouse at the sound of the first shot. Miller's crew did not see the Tiger, but they heard the 88, and they know what it means. Over the radio, Miller's voice is steady. All units, Tiger contact, 600 yards north, hull down position behind the hedgerow on the east side. He's got the lane covered. We can't go straight at him. There's a brief silence. Then Lieutenant Hewitt's voice, younger, higher-pitched, "What do we do?" And Miller, who has been a tank commander since North Africa, who has survived Kasserine Pass in Sicily and now this green hell of Normandy, says, "We spread out, we flank him. 5 of us, 1 of him. We make him turn his armor. Somebody gets a side shot. That's the only way." This was the lesson American tank crews learned in blood across France. Never fight a Tiger frontally. The mathematics of armor penetration were unforgiving. The Sherman 75 mm M3 gun, firing standard M61 armor-piercing shot, could penetrate approximately 90 millimeters of armor at 500 yards, provided the angle of impact was perpendicular. The Tiger's frontal armor was 100 millimeters thick and sloped. A frontal shot would bounce unless fired at point-blank range, and even then, success was not guaranteed. But the Tiger's side armor was only 80 millimeters thick, and the rear armor only 82 millimeters. A Sherman could penetrate that, especially at close range. The problem was getting to the side or rear without being destroyed first. This required coordination, communication, and a willingness to sacrifice. It required one Sherman to draw the Tiger's attention while the others maneuvered. It required someone to play bait. Sergeant Garcia volunteers. His Sherman is the oldest, the most battered, already hit twice in previous engagements and repaired in field workshops. The crew calls it Lucky Lucy with ironic affection, because luck always runs out. Garcia knows this. He is 32 years old, from El Paso, a career soldier who joined the Army in 1936 because there were no jobs and stayed because he was good at it. He has a wife and 2 daughters he has not seen in 18 months. Their photographs are taped inside the turret, next to the gun breech. He looks at them now, briefly, then keys his microphone. I'll draw him. Give me 2 minutes, then move. The Tiger crew watches as a second Sherman emerges from behind the farmhouse, accelerating down the lane toward them. Oberfeldwebel-Meyer permits himself a thin smile. The Americans are brave, but foolish. His gunner already has the range. The gun traverses smoothly. The shot is perfect, striking the Sherman's glacis plate at an angle that should penetrate. But the shell glances off, deflected by a lucky slope, carving a deep scar in the armor, but not penetrating. Garcia's driver, without waiting for orders, spins the tank hard left, crashing through the hedgerow into the field beyond, presenting the Tiger with a moving, angled target. The Tiger's second shot misses, gouging a crater in the earth 10 feet behind the Sherman. Meyer's smile vanishes. He orders the driver to pivot the tank to keep the frontal armor toward the target. But the Tiger is a heavy beast, slow to respond, and in the seconds it takes to traverse, the other 3 Shermans are moving. Miller's Sherman crashes through a hedgerow 200 yards to the west, emerging into an adjacent field. O'Donnell's tank comes through on the east, parallel to the Tiger's position. Hewitt's Sherman circles wide to the south, using a sunken lane for cover. The maneuver is not elegant. There is no parade ground precision. 2 of the Shermans throw tracks momentarily in the soft ground and have to reverse. O'Donnell's tank gets hung up on a hedgerow's root system and has to blast through with high-explosive shells. But the principle is sound. Create multiple threats. Force the Tiger to choose. Exploit the moment of indecision. The German crew realizes too late what is happening. Meyer screams orders into the intercom, but the Tiger can only face one direction at a time. The turret traverse is slow, ponderous, glacial compared to the Shermans darting through the fields around him. He engages O'Donnell's tank, fires, scores a hit on the turret side, but the shell penetrates only part way, jamming the turret ring but not killing the crew. O'Donnell's Sherman lurches to a stop, immobilized but alive. The loader is wounded, bleeding from shrapnel, but the gun still works. From 300 yards, they fire back. The 75mm shell strikes the Tiger's frontal armor and bounces off, ringing the interior like a bell but causing no damage. But it forces Meyer to react, to traverse back toward O'Donnell, and in that moment, Miller's Sherman has a clear shot at the Tiger's left side. The gunner, a kid from Iowa named Peterson who wanted to be an engineer before the war, takes his time. He has one chance. The Tiger's side armor is 80mm thick, and he is at 250 yards, and the shot has to be perpendicular. He adjusts for range, for the slight uphill angle, for the way the Tiger is pivoting. He takes a breath. He squeezes the trigger. The 75mm gun roars. The shell crosses the distance and strikes the Tiger just below the turret ring, exactly where the side armor meets the hull. It penetrates. Inside the Tiger, the shell does not explode immediately. It ricochets, sparks, severs hydraulic lines, kills the loader, sets fire to stored ammunition. The German crew has 15 seconds before the tank becomes an oven. Meyer screams the evacuation order. The driver and radio operator bail out through the forward hatches. Meyer and the gunner escape through the turret. They run toward the tree line as their Tiger brews up behind them, thick black smoke pouring from the hatches, ammunition cooking off in a series of sharp cracks like firecrackers. Hewitt's Sherman emerges from the sunken lane and puts 2 more shells into the Tiger's rear, ensuring it will never move again. Garcia's Sherman, battered but still mobile, limps back to the lane. O'Donnell's crew abandons their immobilized tank, carrying their wounded loader between them. Miller's crew sits in silence for a moment, the engine idling, the smell of cordite thick in the turret. Then Peterson, the gunner, says quietly, "We got him. Jesus Christ, we actually got him." And Miller, who has seen too many friends die in burning tanks, who knows that they were lucky and skill is only part of it, says, "Yeah, we got him. Now let's get the hell out of here before his friends show up." The after-action report filed by 2nd Armored Division Headquarters on June 14, 1944, is dry and bureaucratic. It notes the destruction of 1 Tiger I tank at a cost of 1 M4 Sherman destroyed and 1 immobilized. It commends the crews for initiative and coordination. It does not mention that Lieutenant Bates died of his burns 3 hours later in a field hospital, or that Garcia's driver suffered a mental breakdown that night and had to be evacuated, or that Peterson could not sleep for a week without seeing the Tiger in his dreams. The report does not capture what it felt like to be outgunned and under-armored and terrified, or the desperate improvisation required to survive. It is a document of numbers, not of men, but the lessons spread through the tank battalions in Normandy like wildfire. You could kill a Tiger. It was not invincible. You needed numbers, coordination, and someone willing to draw fire while the others maneuvered. You needed to accept that some tanks would be lost, that some crews would die because that was the price of success. The ratio stabilized around 5 to 1, 5 Shermans to kill 1 Tiger, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on terrain and crew quality and luck. American tankers began to develop tactics specifically for Tiger hunting. They practiced coordinated maneuvers in training areas behind the lines. They learned to recognize the sound of the 88, to identify Tigers by their silhouette, to exploit the Isavoie Tiger's slow traverse and limited visibility. They learned that the Sherman was not a bad tank. It was simply designed for a different kind of war. And they learned to adapt. The symbolic object in this calculus was not the tank itself, but the radio. American armor doctrine emphasized communication. Every Sherman had a radio, a SCR 508 or SCR 528 set, that allowed tank-to-tank coordination in real time. Commanders could coordinate movements, share intelligence, call for support, adjust plans on the fly. The Germans, by contrast, equipped only command tanks with radios. Most panzers relied on flag signals or simply following the leader. This gave American crews a decisive advantage in fluid engagements. When 5 Shermans attacked a Tiger, they were not 5 separate vehicles but one coordinated system, sharing information, adjusting tactics, operating as a team. The radio was the nervous system that made this possible. It was the invisible weapon, the force multiplier that turned numerical advantage into tactical victory. The Tiger crews, for their part, learned their own lessons. The invincibility they had felt on the Eastern Front evaporated in Normandy. Soviet tankers had fought with desperation and weight of numbers, but they lacked coordination and often attacked piecemeal. The Americans were different. They were methodical, communicative, willing to accept losses to achieve objectives. A Tiger ambushing a lone Sherman could dominate, but a Tiger facing 5 coordinated Shermans was in trouble. German tank commanders began to request infantry support, to refuse missions that did not include anti-tank guns, to withdraw earlier and more often. The psychological shift was profound. The Tiger was still a formidable weapon, but it was no longer seen as unstoppable. And once a weapon loses its aura of invincibility, its value diminishes regardless of its actual capabilities. The statistics compiled after the Normandy campaign make sobering reading. Between D-Day and the end of August 1944, American forces in France lost approximately 1,500 Sherman tanks. German forces lost approximately 500 tanks of all types, including perhaps 50 Tigers. The loss ratio was roughly 3-1 in Germany's favor, but the Americans could replace their losses. Shermans poured off assembly lines in Detroit, shipped across the Atlantic, delivered to replacement depots in England and then to France. A battalion that lost 10 tanks one week would receive 10 new tanks the next. The crews were trained, equipped, and sent forward. The production capacity was bottomless. Germany, by contrast, could not replace its losses. The factories were being bombed. Raw materials were scarce. Skilled labor had been drafted. A Tiger destroyed in Normandy could not be replaced for months, if at all. This was the brutal arithmetic of industrial war. Quality mattered, but quantity had a quality all its own. There is a photograph taken by a Signal Corps photographer on June Tudrex, on 15, 1944, 2 days after the engagement near Villers-Bocage. It shows a burned-out Tiger tank, its turret blown off by internal explosion, surrounded by 5 American soldiers posing for the camera. One of them is Sergeant Miller. He is not smiling. His face is gaunt, stubbled, aged beyond his 24 years. Behind him, barely visible in the background, is the wreck of a Sherman, Bates's Sherman, the one destroyed in the opening seconds of the fight. The photographer's caption reads, "American tankers inspect destroyed German Tiger tank." But the photograph tells a different story. It is a portrait of exhaustion, of survival against odds, of men who have learned that victory is not glorious but merely the alternative to death. The transformation in American tank tactics was not limited to tiger hunting. The lessons learned in Normandy, coordination, communication, combined arms integration, were applied across the theater. Sherman crews began working more closely with infantry, using infantry squads to scout ahead and identify anti-tank positions. They coordinated with artillery, calling for fire missions to suppress enemy positions before advancing. They worked with fighter bombers, marking targets with colored smoke and directing airstrikes against hardened positions. The Sherman became the center of a combined arms team, its weaknesses mitigated by the strengths of other units. This was not the tank doctrine the Americans had trained for before the war, but it was the doctrine that won battles. The Tiger, meanwhile, became increasingly irrelevant. As the front moved east into Germany, fuel shortages limited its mobility. Mechanical breakdowns increased as spare parts became unavailable. Experienced crews were killed or captured and could not be replaced. By early 1945, Tigers were often found abandoned by their crews, out of fuel or broken down, destroyed by their own side to prevent capture. The final Tigers were committed to the defense of Berlin in April 1945, dug into rubble-filled streets, fighting from static positions against Soviet armor. They were still dangerous, still capable of destroying enemy tanks, but they were relics of a doctrine that no longer mattered. The war was being decided not by individual weapon systems but by logistics, production, and the ability to sustain operations across thousands of miles. Germany had lost that war long before the last Tiger fired its last shot. Sergeant Miller survived the war. He returned to Ohio in December 1945, was discharged, used the GI Bill to attend college, became a high school teacher. He did not speak about his experiences for 30 years. When he finally did, in an oral history interview conducted in 1975, his memories of the Tiger engagement were fragmentary and uncertain. He remembered the sound of the 88. He remembered Garcia's voice on the radio, calm and resigned. "I'll draw him." He remembered the way Peterson's hands shook after the kill shot. He remembered carrying O'Donnell's wounded loader to an aid station, the man's blood soaking through his uniform. He did not remember feeling victorious. He remembered feeling grateful to be alive and guilty that others were not. The larger truth embedded in the story of 5 Shermans against 1 tiger is this: superiority is not absolute. The tiger was, by every technical measure, the superior tank. Better armor, better gun, better optics, better engineering. But superiority exists in context. In the context of industrial war, where production and logistics and the ability to replace losses matter as much as combat effectiveness, the Sherman was the superior weapon. It could be built in vast numbers. It could be repaired in the field. It could be crewed by men with 12 weeks of training instead of 12 months. It could be adapted, modified, upgraded. It was not designed to win individual duels, but to win campaigns, and campaigns are won by armies, not by individual machines. The American philosophy of war, embodied in the Sherman, was fundamentally democratic. It assumed that victory came not from elite units or superior technology, but from the collective effort of ordinary men given adequate tools and training. The Sherman was an adequate tool. It was not glamorous. It did not inspire terror, but it worked, and it was available in numbers sufficient to overwhelm any defense. The crews who fought in Shermans were not supermen. They were farm boys and factory workers, clerks and students, men drafted from ordinary life and given extraordinary responsibilities. They learned their jobs, did their duty, and when the war was over, they went home. This was the American way of war: pragmatic, industrial, relentless. The tiger represented a different philosophy, one rooted in technical excellence and elite performance. Germany invested enormous resources in producing a small number of highly capable weapons systems crewed by carefully selected personnel. This approach worked well in limited engagements where quality could dominate quantity, but it could not sustain a war of attrition across multiple fronts against enemies with vastly greater resources. The tiger was a masterpiece, but masterpieces cannot be mass-produced, and wars are not won by masterpieces. The bocage country of Normandy is quiet now. The hedgerows remain ancient and implacable, the fields green and peaceful. Tourists visit the D-Day beaches and the war cemeteries, but few venture into the interior where the tank battles were fought. The lanes where Shermans and tigers dueled are paved roads now, lined with neat houses and small farms. There are no markers, no memorials, nothing to indicate that men died here in fire and steel. The earth has reclaimed its own. But beneath the soil, deep in the clay, fragments remain: pieces of armor plate, shell casings, the iron bones of tanks that were never recovered. They are still there, rusting slowly, monuments to a kind of warfare that no longer exists. The lesson of the 5 Shermans endures, encoded in military doctrine, studied in staff colleges, analyzed in countless histories. It is a lesson about adaptation, about using the tools available rather than wishing for better ones, about teamwork and communication, and the willingness to accept risk. It is a lesson that quality can be overcome by quantity, but only if the quantity is intelligently applied. 5 Shermans, acting independently, would have been destroyed by a single tiger. 5 Shermans, coordinating through radios, maneuvering in support of each other, accepting that some would be lost so that one could succeed. Those 5 Shermans could win. And they did win, again and again, across France and into Germany, until there were no more tigers to fight. The mathematics were brutal. The cost was high. But the outcome was never in doubt, because the side with 5 tanks could always build 5 more, and the side with 1 could not.